People always ask me what she was like before the shooting started, and I never know how to answer that, because the honest truth is I barely noticed her at first. You have to understand, when you've been outside the wire long enough, you stop seeing the people who don't carry a weapon. It's not cruel, it's just survival. Your eyes learn to track threats and assets, and a journalist with a camera bag is neither. She was a name on a manifest, a liability we'd been told to babysit. That's all. Her name was Maren Holt, 34 years old. She'd been embedded with us for 11 days when the valley tried to kill us all. I remember the first time I really looked at her. It was the second morning before dawn, and I came around the corner of the motor pool, and she was just standing there in the cold with a cup of coffee, watching the mountains go from black to gray. Not filming, not writing, just watching. And there was something about the way she held still that didn't fit. Most of the reporters who came through were all motion. Questions, questions. Where do I plug this in? Can I get a quote? Maren was quiet. She watched things the way our snipers watched things. Patient. Like she was waiting for the world to reveal itself if she just held still long enough. I should have understood what that meant. I didn't. Nobody did. Our outpost sat at the mouth of a valley. The maps called something I couldn't pronounce, and we called the funnel, because that's what it was. A long throat of dry riverbed and terraced fields, walls of broken rock on both sides climbing up to ridgelines that never seemed to end. Beautiful place if you didn't know any better. Green down low where the water ran, then brown, then bare stone, then snow on the peaks even in summer. The light there was something else. In the evenings, the whole valley would go gold, and you'd forget for a second where you were and why. It was a bad place to be on foot. Everybody knew it. The ridges had 100 places for a man to hide and watch the road, and the road was the only way through. Staff Sergeant Ruiz ran our squad. Cody Ruiz, big quiet guy from Bakersfield, the kind of leader who never raised his voice because he never needed to. He'd been doing this for 9 years, and it showed in his hands and his eyes and the careful way he chose every word. When the brass told him a reporter was coming, he didn't complain. He just said, "Then she stays where I can see her," and that was that. The patrol that morning was supposed to be nothing. A walk to a village 3 clicks up the valley, a meeting with the elders, a handshake, a bag of school supplies, a walk back. We'd done it a dozen times. The kind of mission that's so routine you start to resent it. Maren asked Ruiz if she could come. He looked at her for a long moment. "You do exactly what I say," he told her. "When I say down, you're down before I finish the word. You don't wander, you don't chase a shot. You understand me." "I understand you," she said. "You done this before." And she gave him a small smile that I didn't know how to read at the time. "I've been in some places," she said. That was it. That was the whole conversation. If either of them knew what the day held, they'd have said more. We rolled out at 0600. 11 of us plus Maren. Doc Foss, our medic, walked near the middle with his bag. Owen Tate, the youngest of us, 19 and still excited to be there, walked point with a grin that nothing could wipe off. Reyes had the saw. Coleman and Park and the rest spread out in a loose line the way you learned to, never bunched up, always a little space between you so one bad moment can't take more than one man. Maren walked behind Ruiz. She had her camera out, but she barely used it. Mostly she watched the ridges. I caught her doing it twice, that same stillness, that same patient sweep of her eyes from high left to high right and back. I figured she was nervous. Lots of people watch the high ground when they're scared. It turns out she wasn't scared. She was reading the terrain. There's a difference, and I'd learn it the hard way before the sun was high. The walk-up was uneventful. The village was the way it always was. Kids ran out to look at us. An old man with a beard like white smoke poured us tea we couldn't refuse. Ruiz did his handshake. Tate handed out the school supplies and let a little girl wear his helmet for a photo, and Maren took that picture, and for a second the whole thing felt almost human. Almost like the war was somewhere else and we were just visitors. I've thought about that picture a lot. The little girl in the too big helmet, Tate laughing, the last good moment. We left the village around 10. The sun was up hard by then, the kind of heat that sits on your shoulders like a hand. We started back down the valley the same way we came, and that was the first mistake, and it was nobody's fault, because there was only the one road. I was about fourth from the front when it started. There's a sound the world makes right before an ambush, and once you've heard it, you never forget it. It's not a sound, really. It's the absence of one. The birds stop. The wind seems to hold its breath. For half a second, the whole valley goes wrong in a way you feel in your teeth before your brain catches up. Tate was the first to notice. He stopped walking and his hand came up, and he opened his mouth to say something. And the ridge above us came apart in light and noise. I want to be careful here because I'm not telling a movie. I'm telling you what it was actually like, and what it was actually like was confusion. People think a firefight is clear. It isn't. It's the loudest, most chaotic thing you will ever experience, and your body does things before your mind decides them. I was on the ground before I knew I'd dropped. Rock chips were stinging my face. Somebody was screaming. The air over my head was full of a sound like the world being torn into long strips. They'd set it up perfectly. Fire coming down from two positions on the high ground, left and right, catching us in the open stretch of riverbed where there was almost nothing to hide behind. A classic L-shape, the kind they teach you about and pray you never sit inside. We were in the kill zone, and the men who put us there had been patient, and they had the high ground, and they had us cold. Contact left, contact right, Ruiz was roaring it. Get to the wall, get to the wall. There was a low stone terrace wall maybe 20 meters to our right, the only cover for 100 meters in any direction. 20 meters doesn't sound like much. 20 meters across open ground with two machine guns trying to find you is the longest distance in the world. I ran. I don't remember choosing to. Reyes was up and firing the saw from the hip, trying to buy us a second, his whole body shaking with it. Coleman went down halfway across, and I grabbed his drag handle without slowing and hauled him the rest of the way, and we hit the wall together. And I felt him still breathing against me, and I almost cried with relief. And then I looked back and saw what was happening in the open. Tate was down, out front, exposed, not moving the way a man moves when he's just taking cover. Doc Foss was trying to get to him, and the ground around him was kicking up dust in little fountains, the rounds walking toward him, and he had to stop. He had to throw himself flat behind a rock that was barely big enough, and he was pinned, and Tate was lying out there in the sun. Park was hit. I could hear him. That high, awful sound a strong man makes when something has broken inside him. And our marksman, we had one good rifle in that squad. A designated marksman named Hollies with an optic, and the training to use it, the one man who could maybe reach back and hurt those positions on the ridge. Hollies was on the ground near the wall with his arm bent the wrong way and blood coming through his sleeve faster than blood should come. His rifle was lying in the dirt a body length away from him, and he was reaching for it with the arm that still worked, and he couldn't make it. I'm telling you all of this so you understand the math of that moment. We were 11. 2 were down hard. 1 was pinned in the open. Our one long gun was on the ground beside a man who couldn't lift it. We had rifles that could spray the ridge but couldn't asterisk reach it. Not really. Not the way you need to reach a dug-in machine gun 400 meters up a mountain. They could sit up there all day and kill us one at a time, and there was almost nothing we could do about it. Ruiz was on the radio screaming for support, for air, for anything. And the answer was 20 minutes out at best, and 20 minutes was about 19 minutes more than we had. That's when Maren Holt crawled past me. I almost didn't process it. She was low, lower than I'd have thought a person who'd never done it could get, moving with her elbows and the insides of her knees fast toward Hollies and the rifle in the dirt. I thought she'd lost her mind. I thought she was running the wrong way. I yelled at her to stay down, to get back, and she didn't even look at me. She reached Hollies. I saw her put her hand on his chest, say something to him, calm, 2 words maybe, and then she picked up the rifle. And the way she picked it up changed everything. I can't fully explain this to someone who hasn't held a weapon, but there's a way people hold a rifle that tells you instantly whether they know what they're doing. A nervous person grabs it like it might bite. A trained person settles into it. Their hands go to the right places without looking. Their whole body changes shape around it, gets quiet and organized, becomes a stable platform instead of a frightened animal. Maren Holt picked up that rifle the way a carpenter picks up a hammer they've held 10,000 times. She rolled into the lee of the wall. She didn't fumble. Her left hand found the magazine and tapped it to confirm it was seated. Her thumb found the optic adjustment. Her cheek dropped to the stock and her body went into a shape I'd only ever seen our best shooters make: flat, locked, both elbows down, the whole architecture of it correct in a way you cannot fake and cannot rush. Ruiz saw it too. I watched his face. He'd been about to scream at her to drop it, and he stopped, because he saw the same thing I saw. He saw a stranger become someone else in the space of 2 seconds, and some instinct in him, some 9 years of this instinct, told him to shut up and let her work. The machine guns kept hammering. Tate was still out there in the sun. And Maren Holt let out a long, slow breath, the kind you let out when you've been taught to breathe a certain way 10,000 times until it isn't a choice anymore, and she went still. I'd find out later, much later, who she was before she was a war reporter. The Valley would teach me first, but I want you to hold on to this image because everything that comes next grows out of it. A woman we'd written off as cargo, a rifle that didn't belong to her, a breath let out slow, and 11 shots that none of us who lived will ever forget. The first shot she fired, I almost missed. That's the thing nobody tells you about a real precision shot in the middle of a firefight. It doesn't announce itself. There's so much noise already, so much chaos, that one rifle going off behind your shoulder is just one more sound in 1,000. I felt it more than heard it. A clean, flat crack, very different from the ragged spray the rest of us were putting out. A single, deliberate note in all that screaming. What I heard a half-second later was the left machine gun stop. You learn the rhythm of those guns when they're trying to kill you. You feel it in your spine. That left position had been firing in long, confident bursts, the gunner up there comfortable, working us over like he had all day. And then, nothing. Just gone. A hole punched in the noise where one of the two things killing us used to be. I turned my head and Maren was already shifting, not celebrating, not even pausing. Her body was rotating a few degrees, her eyes still down on the optic, hunting for the second gun. She worked the bolt without looking at it, that smooth little motion that means a round's already chambered and the brass is already gone, and she settled again. Second crack. The right gun didn't stop, but it stuttered. Someone up there had been hit and someone else was scrambling to take over, and in that half-second of confusion, the pressure on us let up just enough for Reyes to get the saw up over the wall and start putting real fire back up the hill. "She's reaching them," Coleman said next to me, like he didn't believe it. "How is she's reaching them?" I didn't have an answer. None of us did. The math that had been killing us a minute ago was changing in front of our eyes, and the thing changing it was a journalist most of us couldn't have picked out of a crowd that morning. Third shot. I was watching the ridge now, trying to spot for her the way you would for any shooter, and I saw the third one land. There was a figure that had popped up to reposition the right gun, just a shape against the brown rock, and the shape dropped and didn't get back up. The right gun went quiet too. For about 4 seconds the whole valley went almost silent, both heavy guns down, just our rifles and the ringing in my ears. Then they adjusted. They always adjust. These weren't amateurs, they'd built that ambush like professionals, and professionals don't break and run because they lose 2 guns. Fire started coming again from new positions, individual shooters spreading out along the ridge, smarter now, harder to find, and the rounds started snapping past us again. But the spell was broken. We weren't pinned anymore. We were in a fight, an ugly one, but a fight you can be in instead of one you can only die in. and that difference is everything. Holt, Ruiz had crawled over to her. Can you keep their heads down on the left? I need to get to my wounded. I've got the left, she said. That was the whole exchange. I've got the left. 3 words flat and certain, no fear in them and no swagger either. Just a person stating a fact about a job they could do. What happened over the next few minutes I've put back together from a dozen conversations with the men who were there, because no single one of us saw all of it. But the heart of it is this. Maren Holt held the left side of that ridge by herself with one rifle while the rest of us did the things that needed doing. Doc Foss got to Tate. He had to wait for a window, and the window was Maren. Every time a shooter on the left tried to draw down on the open ground where Tate lay, that flat crack came from behind the wall and the shooter changed his mind fast, or didn't get the chance to change anything ever again. Foss told me afterward he counted on it. He said he learned to move in the gaps her rifle made. He said she was reading them. She knew where they'd pop up before they popped up. I'd see her swing the barrel to a spot, and a second later a guy would show up right where the barrel already was, and she'd take him, and I'd run. Shot 4, shot 5, shot 6. I can't give you the exact order anymore, and neither can anyone else, and I think that's honest. A firefight isn't a list, but the men who were watching her agree on the count, and the count is what stuck. 11 shots, 11 targets, and not 11 sprays and praise, 11 deliberate, aimed, breathing-controlled shots, each one chosen, each one finding what it was sent for. I want to be careful about how I say this part because it matters. I'm not telling you a story about a person enjoying killing. I want to be very clear about that because of what came after, because of what I saw in her face when it was over. There was nothing joyful in it. There was nothing even angry in it. What I saw, in the seconds I could spare to look at her, was a kind of terrible focus. The focus of someone doing a hard, grim thing because the alternative was watching us die in the open, and choosing, over and over, to do the hard, grim thing instead. Every shot cost her something. I believe that now. I didn't understand it then. Foss dragged Tate back to the wall. Tate was alive. Bad, but alive. A round had gone through the meat of his shoulder and out, and Foss got pressure on it and got fluid into him, and that boy who'd worn his helmet on a laughing little girl that morning was going to make it home. And the only reason was that for the length of that drag, one rifle had owned the high ground on the left. Park was the hard one. Park had taken a round low in the gut, the kind of wound that scares medics most, and Foss worked on him at the wall with Maren's rifle cracking overhead the whole time, buying him room, buying all of us room. Around shot 8, I think, the enemy tried something. A group of them had worked down the left side of the valley, using a fold in the ground, trying to flank us and get an angle on the wall where it wouldn't protect us anymore. It's a smart move. If they'd pulled it off, the wall stops being cover and we're back in the open with nowhere to go. Maren saw it before any of us. I told you about that patient sweep of her eyes I'd noticed on the first morning, that I'd mistaken for nerves. That's what it was for. She was always reading the ground. While the rest of us were locked onto the threats in front of us, some part of her was watching the whole board, and when those men slipped into that fold to flank us, she was already looking at the exact place they'd have to come out. She didn't fire into the fold. She waited. I remember Ruiz starting to point, starting to say, left, left. They're coming around and she said very quietly, not even looking up, I see them. Wait. And we waited. And the first man came out of the fold exactly where she was looking, and the flat crack came, and he dropped. And the second man came and the same thing happened. And the third man decided that whatever was killing his friends was not worth dying for, and the flank just stopped. Folded back. 3 shots, and the smartest move our enemy made all day was dead in the dirt of a fold in the ground because a war reporter had read it coming. That was shots 8, 9, and 10, the way most of us remember it. The 11th is the one I saw clearest, because by then the air support Ruiz had been screaming for was close. You could hear it coming, that beautiful low thunder over the peaks, and the enemy heard it too, and they started to break. That's the most dangerous moment, weirdly, when they run, because a running man can still turn and fire, and we had wounded who couldn't move and a perimeter to hold. One shooter, up high on the left where the first machine gun had been, decided he was going to make his last act count. He set up, deliberate, taking his time, lining up on the cluster of us around Park and Foss, where the wounded were, where Foss was kneeling with both hands trying to keep Park alive, and had no idea he was about to die for it. I saw the shooter. I couldn't get my rifle around in time. I remember the cold, total certainty that Foss was about to be killed, and there was nothing I could do, that whole sick, helpless feeling crashing down all over again. And the flat crack came one last time. 11. The shooter on the ridge slumped over his rifle and stayed there. Foss never even knew. He kept working on Park, both hands red, completely unaware that a half-second of someone else's perfect attention had just stood between him and the end of his life. Then the helicopters were overhead, and the valley turned into a different kind of noise, and the enemy that was left melted back into the rocks the way they always did, and just like that, it was over. Maybe 40 minutes start to finish. It felt like a year. It felt like 10 seconds. And in the sudden, ringing quiet after, with the dust settling and the gunships circling and the medevac coming in, I looked over at Maren Holt. She had set the rifle down, carefully, the way you set down something that doesn't belong to you with respect, laying it back near Holly's where she'd found it. And she was just sitting against the wall with her back to the stone, her hands open in her lap, palms up, staring at nothing. Not crying, not shaking, just emptied out. The terrible focus had drained out of her and left a face I'll never forget, because it was the face of someone who has just done something they swore to themselves they would never do again. That's the part of the story I didn't understand until later, again. I'm getting ahead of myself. Tate lived. Park lived barely after 2 surgeries, but he lived, and he's got kids now. Coleman, the one I dragged to the wall, lived. Holly's kept his arm. 11 of us walked into the funnel that morning, and because of one woman, 11 of us came out, even the ones who came out on stretchers. She'd been just a war reporter. That's what the manifest said. That's what we all believed. The truth was a lot heavier than that, and she carried it alone, and she'd been carrying it long before she ever met us. I didn't get the real story from Maren. She never told it. I got it in pieces over the weeks that followed from a sergeant major who'd pulled her file, from one old photograph that fell out of her notebook, and finally from one short conversation she and I had on a cold night before she rotated out, when neither of us could sleep. Here is what I learned about who she was before she was just a war reporter. She grew up in the mountains of Montana, in a part of the country where the towns are an hour apart and the winters try to kill you. Her father was a hunting guide, and before that, a competitive long-range shooter, the kind who drove to matches and came home with little trophies he kept in a drawer because he thought it was vain to put them out. He taught her to shoot the way some fathers teach their kids to read. Before she could drive, she could read wind off the grass and the way it moves on the surface of a far-off pond. She could hold a rifle steady through her own heartbeat. She could do the math of distance and drop in her head, fast, the way you do your times tables. She was, by the time she was 20, one of the best precision shooters in her state. Not good for a girl, just good. The kind of good that's rare in anyone. And she had a younger brother, Daniel. He looked up to her the way younger brothers do, and where she went he wanted to go, and when she joined the army he followed her a year later. She did her years. She was a soldier, and from what little I could confirm, she was very good at a very specific and very lonely job, the same job she did for us in the funnel without anyone knowing she'd ever held it. She doesn't talk about that time, and I'm not going to put words in her mouth about what she did or where, but she got out. She put the rifle down and she swore she was done, and she went to school and became a writer, because she wanted to spend the rest of her life telling true stories instead of ending them. Her brother Daniel stayed in. And Daniel was killed overseas, in a valley not so different from ours, in an ambush not so different from the one that nearly got us all. I don't have the details and I wouldn't share them if I did, but I know that she wasn't there. I know that she was home, in an apartment writing, when the men in dress uniforms came up the walk, and I know that the not being there is the thing that broke something in her and never fully healed. That's why she became a war reporter, not for the byline, not for the adrenaline. She told me that night, the sleepless one, in about as many words as she ever spent on herself, I couldn't be there for him, so I decided I'd go be there. For the next ones, I'd at least see it. I'd at least write it down so somebody back home would know what it actually costs. That's what the stillness was. That's what the patient eyes were. She wasn't a journalist who happened to know how to shoot. She was a soldier who had chosen, with her whole heart, never to shoot again, who had walked away from the most dangerous thing she knew how to do because she wanted her hands to make stories instead of graves. And then, in our valley, Tate was down in the sun, and Foss was pinned, and Hollies couldn't lift his own rifle, and the math said we were all going to die. And Maren Holt had to decide, in 2 seconds, whether the promise she'd made to herself was worth 11 of our lives. She picked up the rifle. I think about the weight of that choice more than I think about almost anything else from over there. Most of us, when the shooting starts, we don't really choose. We're trained until the choice is made for us, until our bodies do the thing before our minds can object. That's mercy in a way. It spares you the deciding. Maren didn't have that mercy. She had to actually decide, knowing exactly what she was deciding, knowing precisely what each shot would cost the part of her that had spent years trying to become a person who only watched. She picked up the rifle with her eyes wide open. She broke a promise to herself 11 times so that 11 of us could keep going home to people who will never know her name. When it was over, when she set that rifle down so carefully, that's what I was looking at on her face. The cost. A woman who just spent something she'd been trying to protect and spent it gladly and would do it again and would also grieve it. All of that at once. I didn't have the words for it then. I'm not sure I have them now. She never let us thank her properly. We tried. The day before she left, the whole squad, the walking ones and the ones in wheelchairs and the ones with arms and slings, we got together to give her something. I don't even remember what, some clumsy gift Coleman had organized, and she got so uncomfortable that Ruiz finally just stepped in and shook her hand and said, "Ma'am, we know what you did." And she nodded and her eyes were wet and she said, "Take care of each other," and that was all she'd accept. She wrote about the ambush. Of course she did. It's a good piece, an honest one, all about the bravery of the soldiers and the chaos and the cost. If you read it, you'd never know she was anything but an observer. She left herself out of it entirely. There's not one line in it about a woman picking up a rifle. She gave us all the credit, every bit of it, and kept her own part folded up and put away where nobody would find it. The same way her father kept his trophies in a drawer because he thought it was vain to do anything else. I've kept her secret for a long time. I'm telling it now, all these years later, because Tate has kids and Park has kids and Coleman has a grandkid on the way, and I think there are people walking around in this world, whole families, who exist because of 11 shots that nobody outside that valley ever knew about. And I think that ought to be known. Not for her, she'd hate it, for them, for the living. People always ask me what she was like, and I used to fumble the answer because the honest version is too big for the question. So now I just tell them the truest thing I know. She came to that war to record the dead because she couldn't save the one she loved. And when the moment came, she put down her pen and her camera and the careful, gentle person she'd worked so hard to become. And she picked up the thing she'd sworn off forever, and she held back death with it for us. 11 times, and then she set it down and went back to being who she'd chosen to be, and never once asked for credit. She was just a war reporter. That's what we all thought, right up until the moment she became the reason we're alive.